as we began the course, but due to some circumstances, she had to start ahead because this is to lay the foundation of what waste management is all about. And by introduction, I'm Dr. Oluseyi. Um, my area of specialty is in analytical and environmental chemistry. And I'll be taking these aspects of the course for this session. And also, if you check through your LMS, you will see that I posted some materials on the LMS for your reading, and it is not, those materials posted on the LMS are not exhaustive. They are, you could read wide within the premise of um, the curriculum for this course. So it is not just, you don't limit yourself to just the materials. Those are just to serve as guides for you to know the content and the depth of what is expected of you for this course. So talking about waste management, we know generally that waste are whatever we regard as rubbish or trash, refuse, garbage, junk, litter, and rots, whatever name that is called, is anything that is unwanted or useless. But that kind of definition within the premise of environmental management would not want to take that definition as it is, because we know that if you call whatever is useless to someone might be something that is precious to another person. And that is why you see in our parts of the world, we see people, we call them scavengers. They go from dustbin to dustbin or dump site to dump site, looking for materials that are useful to them. And for someone that has discarded such materials, that person might see them as being useless, but it's something that somebody else might need as a starting point for some other work or production. And that is why you see people recycling or getting trash and bringing out wealth out of waste. And we also see that in the course of this lecture. So generally, it is known as what is useless and unwanted, but in terms of waste management, that goes beyond that context. In biology, waste can be regarded as any unwanted substance or toxin that are expelled from living organisms. Metabolic waste, such as your feces, urine, urea, sweat, and the likes, that is also waste. The body gets rid of waste because they are unwanted substances, and actually many of them are toxic, and the body can't just keep them, and that is why they are regarded as waste. And some people that have problem, maybe like passing urine, definitely they have to go through dialysis to be able to expunge those wastes from their body, as the body can't live with those wastes. So just like human body is not made to live with waste, human beings generally in our environment, we are not also meant to live with waste. We have the Basel Convention definition of waste, and Basel Convention definition of waste defines waste as substances or objects that are disposed of or are intended to be disposed of or are required to be disposed of by the provisions of the law. So it means that it's not even those that are intended to be disposed or already disposed of or are required to be disposed of are all termed as waste. So I want you to read more about the Basel Convention. The Basel Convention is the convention of the part of the United Nations Environmental Protection. Basel is a place in Switzerland, and that convention took place at Basel in Switzerland. And the convention, at that convention, there were some agreements that were reached at that convention, and one of such is the Waste Convention. So by disposal, because Basel Convention says there are objects that are disposed or intended to be disposed or required to be disposed. So when we talk about disposal, any operation that may lead to resource recovery, recycling, reclamation, direct reuse, or alternative uses. So look at the key points there: resource recovery. So sometimes you may want to recover some resources even from waste material. For example, your electronics, there are some precious metals that are in your discarded electronics. Many of these equipments we use, they come to what we call their end of life. Even when they don't come to their end of life, we all are, many of us use gadgets. As you are rejoicing that you are having an iPhone 12, the following year or a few months later, another version of the phone comes out. And some people keep up moving on with the pace of the new inventions or latest gadgets or electronics. And as such, you can't just keep on accumulating these gadgets. They have to be disposed of. So sometimes they are reused or used for alternative purposes, or they are reclaimed, or they are recycled. Whatever, those are the means of disposal that Basel Convention has made provision for. So the Basel Convention held in 1989, and all parties, that is the countries that were signatories to this party, met at Basel in March 1989, but the enforcement came into full force in 1992. So Basel Convention was about the control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and their disposal. So the full name of that convention, was about, the full agenda was centered on the control of transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal. In the course of the lecture, we'll look at what these hazardous wastes are. Hazardous waste, from the name, some people think that, okay, they're just maybe waste that are generated by industries, but we also have hazardous waste that are generated in homes and in public places. Not just industrial waste are hazardous. Hazardous waste also are generated even in some of the wastewater from wastewater treatment plants, in the sewage wastewater treatment plants. Some hospital waste also are termed as hazardous waste. We are working on the analysis, and we got a grant to work on the analysis of wastewater for COVID-19. Normally the test for COVID-19 has been in human samples. People go for tests. Maybe they swab a nasal or mouth swabs are taken to the laboratory to test for COVID-19. But recently it's been found that, or ever since the emergence of the virus, it's been found that COVID-19 can be released through your feces or urine. And that led to this project that I'm currently working on with some researchers in the UK and in South Africa. And we are collecting wastewater from wastewater treatment plants, from hospital, the IDH, from the university wastewater plants, and some residential wastewater treatment plants. And so far in the campaign of the work we're doing, we have seen COVID-19 in wastewater, even that is discarded into the central sewage system. So such waste cannot be handled the same way you handle waste that are not infectious. So those are types of hazardous waste, and there should be a way we control such waste so that they do not become problems in the environment. Please, I advise you to mute your microphone. All these background noises I'm hearing, please mute your microphones. So the Basel Convention is an international treaty signed by all parties that belong to the under that United Nations Environment Protection, and it was designed to reduce the movement of hazardous waste between nations, especially to prevent the transfer of hazardous waste from developed to less developed country. And I'm sure many of us, if you are aware, in the 90s, about what we call the cocoa toxic waste. This was a waste that was brought into Nigeria from Italy. So they just shipped this with the waste products, which were toxic, were shipped under disguise, and they were brought to cocoa in Delta State. And it was on inspection at the where it was dumped, they found out that this waste were actually toxic. And somebody just bought them and under the guise that they were something else, but they were actually toxic waste. So that is why this treaty controls the movement of hazardous waste, especially from developed countries to the less developed countries or on developing countries. But this, as at the time it was signed, did not address the movement of radioactive waste. So this convention, apart from the control of the movement of the waste, also is intended to minimize the amount and toxicity of waste generated. And this is to be done to ensure the environmentally sound management of this waste, and also to assist the less developed countries in the management of hazardous and other wastes that are generated. So this convention is to assist majorly the less developed countries in the management or sound management of their waste. We know that waste is still a major problem that we're battling with, especially in places, in urban cities. There was a time in Lagos that there are some roads in Lagos that when you are driving, maybe a road that is made of 3 lanes, only 1 lane will be available for vehicle to pass because majority of the road or the curbs have been littered with waste. So the Basel Convention addresses this. So another definition of waste by United Nations Statistic Division, there states that waste are materials that are not prime products. That is, they are not products produced for the market. So they are not, you can't see anybody selling waste generally. Although nowadays, you see people picking up plastics and they are sold to industries that make use of them for recycling purposes. But they are not prime products for which the generator has no further use in terms of his or our own purposes of production, transformation, or consumption, and of which he or she wants to dispose. So these are the definition tells us that materials that are not prime products that the generator of the waste has no further use of. So if I drink or if I buy water today in a PET bottle and I drink the water, whatever is left is not what is needed. And once I drink my water and I drop the bottle, that is termed as waste because I have no further use. But if, for example, I'm making zobo and I need to use the bottle to pack my zobo, that plastic bottle, to me, making use of it for further production is not termed as waste. That's because it is going to be useful for something else and I'm not disposing of it. So that waste differs. So to somebody manufacturing maybe liquid soap, plastic bottle is not a waste to that person. So the disposer or the generator of waste is the one that will determine what is a waste to him or her, and that which he or she wants to dispose. So sometimes when raw materials are being extracted, wastes are usually generated. Sometimes when we are processing materials, wastes are also generated. Let's say in the manufacture of paper, for example, or maybe you are manufacturing exercise books, you have to cut, maybe trim the edges of the paper. All those trimmings during the production of your goods and or your goods, some of them also generate waste. And that is why in industries, you have a lot of waste produced or generated in industry. So sometimes waste can be generated during raw material, extraction of raw material, like when you are producing crude, during the production or extraction of crude oil, you have what you have produced water, you have some sludge and some other things that are generated as waste during extraction of raw material, or maybe gold processing. You have raw materials that are generated. When these raw materials are processed, like for example, when gold is being processed, there are some waste products that are released into the environment. Like the example of the time we had lead poisoning in Zamfara and in Niger State. While they were producing gold, what they were after was the production of gold. But during the production of gold, there was the release of waste, and the waste of the mining tails contained lead. And this lead in turn went into the water of these people in the community, poisoned the water of that community, and we had fatalities. Many children and the people that were actively involved in the processing of the raw material got infected by the toxic lead, and many people died. So when raw material is being processed, there could be release of waste, either during the intermediate products or final products. And also when the final products are consumed, like when you drink your Coca-Cola or you drink your canned drinks or you make use of some products, and after the end of life of the products, you have your waste produced. Human activities, if you go to mile 12 where we have sale of food items, every day tons of waste are generated from the compost of maybe tomato, fruits and vegetables. Human activities will always generate waste. When you have your bath in the morning, you bathe in the bathroom, the wastewater from your bathroom, when you bathe, you are also releasing waste. Everybody from the day you are born, from birth, from cradle to death, waste is always generated because we make use of products that would always really lead to the release of waste into the environment. So the residuals of this waste can be recycled or reused so that we would have less waste in the environment. So when we talk about waste, we have different types of waste. There's the material I posted on the LMS. We have liquid waste, we have solid waste. Like the example I gave before about the projects we are doing with the UK Research and Innovation on wastewater, that is liquid waste. So any waste that is generated in liquid form, your domestic washing, everybody have their bath every day. And when you're in the bathroom, you make use of soap, shampoos, and the likes. So when you bathe, your water goes into the drainage, and that is a form of liquid waste. When you go to toilets, you flush down the drain. That is liquid waste mixed with feces and some other things, chemicals, oils. Sometimes when we, some mechanic workshops, when they service vehicles or engines of generator, you use engine oil. And sometimes when they discard the waste, the used engine or the spent engine oil, they sometimes just pour it into the canal or into the gutter. Those are liquid waste. Oils, wastewater from ponds, maybe those that have fish farms, they they change their water every day. And the water they are releasing to the environment might be water that is loaded with antibiotics or drugs that they are feeding the animals with, or maybe from poultry. Manufacturing industries also generates liquid waste. So any form of waste in the liquid form is termed as liquid waste. We also have the solid waste, which are waste in solid forms from domestic, commercial, industrial, marketplaces, construction places. When you have demolitions at construction sites, there will be release of waste of rubbles, plastic, metals, glass, scrap irons, even papers. Sometimes, was it last week, I went to the Senate building to the personnel, and while walking along the corridor, there was a huge pile of papers and files labeled of people that had retired from the university, people that are deceased. And of course, those things are now, they don't need them. Maybe a few years after those people get disengaged from the university service, all those tons and heaps of those files will definitely become waste. Or maybe as lecturers, student scripts, like in the university, we keep scripts for up to 10 years. And after 10 years, such paper, they become waste. Do we just throw them into the environment, or they are recycled for some other uses later on? So all these papers, and we are happy now that many times, many of these things are being replaced. There were times in the bank before that you have to fill tellers before you collect money from banks. But now you could do cashless withdrawal. You go via right on the teller desk. You use your ATM card to withdraw money rather than filling tellers, because all those pieces of paper, no matter how small they would end up becoming trash. Or nowadays, when people want to do events, we don't have people giving paper IVs anymore. Many of the invitation cards now are electronic IVs, and you don't have to produce papers. Even nowadays, you rarely see people giving people greeting cards or congratulatory cards. Those things are getting fewer and fewer because paper as it is also a form of waste. So these are solid waste that we always generate day in, day out. Or you want to talk about it. And some of these waste, some of them are degradable, biodegradable, and some are non-degradable. And it is the ones that are non-degradable that are actually constituting a lot of problem in the environment, because they stay in the environment for many, 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 many years without reducing in size or in quantity. I read an article that a diaper of a baby that is used can be in the landfill site for like 30 years before it finally gets decomposed. So that is why we know that every day we generate waste, with both solid waste and liquid waste. So solid waste, like I said before, are garbage or refuse, which are usually municipal solid waste, sludge from a wastewater treatment plant, water supply treatment plants, or air pollution control. So according to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, even sludge, like when I went to the wastewater treatment plants in the university, the wastewater, when it comes, it gets to a place where it sediments, and the sludge is gathered in a place. Then the liquid form is pumped into the several layers of treatment and is discarded into the environment. But the sludge, those are the residue, the thick residues of the waste from different homes. They are also solid waste because over time they get accumulated in such environments. Discarded materials from industries, commercial places, mining operations and agricultural operations, and also community activities. So all these are the solid waste that we generate. And like I said before, according to their properties, waste can be classified as those that are biodegradable. And from the name, they are the ones that can be degraded. They can form compost over time when they are in suitable conditions, whether aerobic or anaerobic. They go down and decompose into the environment, and those like fruits and vegetable food items, paper and wood. But the non-biodegradable ones cannot be degraded. And the major the constituents of this, which every one of us, day in, day out, we add to the environment, are plastics. And plastics are so recalcitrant because they persist in the environment for many, many, many years. And not just that they persist in the environment, they can be washed into the oceans and water bodies. And there's a problem of what we have now, we call them microplastics. These plastics, even though they may not retain their entity, they can break down into tiny fragments, which are called microplastics. And these microplastics are also another form of pollutants in the environment. Microplastics are so tiny from their names that they can get into water, drinking water that we drink. And these plastics contain what we call plasticizers. And plasticizers are contaminants or chemicals that have been found to be carcinogens or endocrine disruptors in human bodies. And they've done a lot of analysis of these microplastics, even in drinking water. And sometimes, and because of their nature, they are so tiny that the water may look crystal clear, but when they are observed under high magnifying electron microscopes, you will see those tiny fragments of plastics, because the plastics will not degrade. They can only chip into nano and micro particulates. They've also found them even in aquatic organisms. There are many aquatic organisms that have died because they were consuming a lot of plastics. I watched a documentary on BBC at some time that plastics were, a sea turtle died and was washed to the sea shore. And all these in advanced countries, if it was in Nigeria, they see a huge fish at the bar beach, everybody will bring knife and start cutting, taking their portion to cook. But these ones, when they found a big sea turtle or a big, one giant, maybe a baby whale washed to the shore, they opened it up, and once they find in it were nylons and plastics that this aquatic organism had consumed, which led to the death. So a lot of biodiversity is being lost as a result of these plastics. I also watched another documentary where in the ocean, I think a beach or an island in either Australia or New Zealand, there were lots of plastics on the seashore. And maybe the researcher, a geographer or a biologist, I don't know now, that was covering the documentary was picking up each of these plastics. And to my amazement, many of the plastics that were found as far as New Zealand and Australia were migrated from Europe, because they were picking up those bottles and they were seeing some of them are still had their labels intact on the nylon on the bottles, and they were seeing some of them produced in China, in Japan, in Europe, and they were washed in the ocean, and they went as far as Australia and New Zealand. So you can see that whatever is generated at a particular place, once it gets into the water system, it can be washed and go and travel farther from the places where such wastes are generated. So, and they cannot be degraded, and that is why they become a problem. We have bottles, we have old machines. Nowadays, when you go to dump sites, you see a lot of discarded electronics, like maybe the cathode ray tubes of television, old television set. Most of us in our homes now, we have LED TVs and the plasma TVs. All those old cupboard-like or microwave-like televisions are no more useful. Or computer, remember the old desktop computers we used to use before? Many of those ones, they are obsolete. So they all find their ways to landfill sites. When the scavengers go there, they only pick the useful, maybe the copper, the metals that are useful. The plastics and the containers where these equipment were housed become obsolete, and they are left in the environment. And some of them contain materials that are radioactive. Some of them contain materials that are poisonous, that are hazardous. Take, for example, maybe a discarded X-ray machine. It can still emit radiation, and some of them contain some radioactive properties, like radioactive materials like nickel, like uranium, and these are also toxic to the environment. You have your metal cans, your styrofoam containers. Many of these take away food containers. Sometimes when it rains in Lagos, you will see them on the canals filled up with styrofoam containers that people use for food packaging, and they will be there for as many years as possible. So these are the problems that waste, if they're not properly handled, can lead to the environment. So we can also classify waste according to their effects on human health and environment. And these two categories are the hazardous waste and the non-hazardous waste. So the hazardous ones, from their names, are substances that are unsafe to use commercially, industrially, agriculturally, or economically. And they have any of the following properties. They are ignitable. That means they can cause fire at any time. They are corrosive in nature. They are highly reactive, and they are very toxic. Many of the toxic components of them, many of them are carcinogens. Some of them are mutagenic. Some of them are carcinogenic. Nowadays, we hear a lot of cancers of all forms. Many of them could be traced to the mishandling of this hazardous waste. And the major problem of this toxicity, sometimes you're like, what is my business with they are being toxic? After all, when they are discarded, they are taken by Loma, they are dumped at the dump sites. I'm not living on the dump sites. I'm not picking from the dump sites. But one thing is that what goes round comes round. Many of these, when we get to further in this lecture, we see that some of them, when the toxic ones, when they are not properly handled, they can leach. All these toxic chemicals can leach into the soil, and the soil, we know some of these soils we have on the roadside where they sell vegetables. You see very green, leafy ugu or green, very leafy and fresh, but you don't know where it was planted. It could have been planted on a soil at a dump site where you have large depositions of lead or mercury or some of these toxic elements. And there's something we call bioaccumulation. These plants can accumulate, can take them up from the soil. As the plant is picking up essential nutrients from the soil, it will also pick up these toxic elements from the soil. And when human beings consume them, they also get into the human body. Or sometimes you buy fish, point and kill. You don't know where the fish was harvested from, maybe from a polluted water where there has been discharge of an hazardous substance, and the fish gets into the body of the fish, and you buy the fish and you eat. And as you eat the fish, many of these toxic elements also get into the human body. And so that is why we can't but look for very good ways of managing our waste, especially the hazardous ones. I'm talking about ignitability. There was a time, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, that there was an formation of fire at Olusosun dump site for days on ending. The fire kept on burning and burning. And the reason is that many of these hazardous waste, with a little spark of fire, they can ignite and cause a lot of fire, which can even spread beyond the dump site to nearby homes and facilities around. So these are the problems of hazardous waste that we need to look at. Then the non-hazardous ones, they are relatively safe to use commercially, industrially, agriculturally, or economically. So commercially, they can be recycled. And industrially, they can also be starting points for some other, as raw materials for some other things. For example, people go about picking plastics, and those plastics can be recycled to make some other things. Industrially, they use them to make dustbins or to make plastic window blinds or carpets or some other things that are not for food consumption. Plastics can be recycled, tires can be recycled. They can be agriculturally, your leftover food or waste products from plants and vegetables can be recycled and made into compost. Or maybe your waste from poultry can also be used as useful as compost for agricultural purposes. And so they don't have the properties that have been mentioned for hazardous waste. So, but these non-hazardous ones, they usually constitute nuisance if they are not properly disposed. You can imagine putting heaps, or if you are passing through mile 12 or any market, you see a lot of waste. When it is corn season or maize season, you see cobs of maize, husk of maize littering the whole environment. You see when it's a season of mango, you see mango everywhere, rotten and spoiled mango. So they usually create disposal problems if they are not well handled or managed. So these are we can also classify. So remember that we said we can classify waste according to their properties, whether they are degradable or non-degradable. We can classify waste according to their effects on human health and environment. So they can be classified as being hazardous or non-hazardous. We could also classify waste according to their origin or type, where they come from. So we have the municipal solid waste. So these are waste that are generated from homes. Every home would always generate waste on a daily basis, except if that home is locked up and nobody lives there. Every day there's a waste you generate in every household. And they are also, the municipal solid waste are also construction and demolition waste. Maybe there is a new house that's being constructed and you're pulling down, especially in an urban place like Lagos, where you have developments here and there. one house is pulled down, a new one is being constructed. So there'll be demolition debris of maybe iron rods, asbestos, wood, metals, concrete. Those are the they are still classified as municipal solid waste. Sanitation residues, when you say the people sweeping the streets, they gather waste, packaging materials, trade, sorry, that should be refuses, not refugees. Refuses, when we from, when you buy a new electronic product, the packaging, the carton. I recently bought something at home, and the packaging alone, the waste that we removed from the packaging of the material to secure it was something else. By the time I pulled up everything I need, the waste already generated from that was also very large. And usually, municipal solid waste are managed by any municipality. Let's say for Lagos, for example, they are managed by the LOMA and the PSP operators. They go about, when you put out any of this waste in front of your house or in your dustbin at regular intervals in places where they service, they pick them up and they are taken to where they'll be properly disposed of. We have biomedical waste. So these are waste that they could be solid or liquid that are generated from hospitals or research centers where diagnosis take place in medical, has to do with medical sciences. So they have a special container where you contain such waste. Maybe in a theater where there are a lot of maybe human waste from surgical processes. Nowadays, people do a lot of liposuction. They remove fats in their bodies. Those are biomedical waste. People do appendectomy. They cut organs, maybe. They remove, during amputation, human parts are cut off. During childbirth, there are obstetrics waste that are generated. So you can't just discard them and put them in the same place where you put your everyday waste. Also in laboratories, maybe people put there to submit their urine or feces. Those materials will also generate waste. Or research activities. I was at the virology lab in the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, and everything they're doing there, even the filter papers, the test tubes, all the vials they are using for this analysis of COVID-19, they can't just throw them in normal dustbin. There is a special way the waste, whatever they use, are kept, because you don't want them to contaminate other normal everyday waste that is being generated even in the offices around there. We also have industrial waste. Industrial waste are usually liquid. They can be liquid or solid, and they are generated by industrial processes like chemical, petrochemical, metal, sanitary, paper, any industry, fine chemicals, or maybe household products, sanitary, detergent, soaps, and the likes. So they also generate liquid and solid waste, and they are also to be handled in a special way, because many of them contain chemicals, and many of the chemicals are toxic, and you don't want them to be washed into the water bodies or into the environment. We have agricultural waste, which are generated from agricultural activities, and mostly they are biodegradable. We also have some agricultural waste that are pollutants, that are hazardous, talking about your pesticides. Pesticides are chemicals that we don't want in the environment for too long. Some of them stay long in the environment, and human beings should not have contact with these pesticides that are used for agricultural products. Many of them, of the pesticides, are harmful. Remember, there was a time in Lagos, we had what they call killer beans, that some of these people selling beans were actually rubbing a lot of, is it sniper or some other chemicals, so that their beans will not grow weevils. And little did they know that some of these chemicals were supposed to be used when at the farms, not when the products are stored. There are different types of chemicals based on the safety of the chemicals when they are used. So some of them were using wrong chemicals to preserve food, and people were consuming such food, and people a lot of some fatalities were recorded. There was a video that also went viral about one man selling, is it crayfish, this stockfish, and they were robbing sniper on stockfish that they were selling. And some people will not wash them, or they will even wash it. Some of them may not really be removed by washing, and people get them. So agricultural waste are the waste that are related from agricultural activities, either farming, or you can maybe, for example, you have a poultry, and all the waste products, the feces of the birds, of the animals in the poultry, or a piggery, they will also release waste that are agricultural. And this waste also needs to be handled and disposed of very well. We have the fishery waste from fishery activities, and you find them extensively in coastal and estuarine areas, and that would lead to marine pollution and the likes. We have radioactive waste. Radioactive waste are waste that contain radioactive materials, and sometimes they are fallouts of nuclear processes and activities. Sometimes some industries are not involved in nuclear activities, but they produce some radioactive waste. One of my students, a PhD student, was working on samples from a particular dump site, and she was able to identify uranium. Uranium was found in some of the soil samples that she took at that site. And the uranium there's no radioactive process taking place there, but the radioactive elements may be a waste that is obtained or released from a particular material that was discarded at such dump sites. And like I also said about maybe your machines, some diagnostic machines in the hospitals also contain some radioactive elements. Talk about your CT scan or your magnetic resonance image, your MRI. Some of them contain some radioactive elements, and sometimes maybe when this instrument is gets to the end of life and is no more working, they are discarded into the environment, and many of these radioactive elements can also be released into the environment. So it's not all about in the radioactive process that releases radioactive waste. Some other um, activities which are not entirely nuclear, but they contain radioactive elements, can release radioactive waste into the environment. And we also have a very common one, which every one of us, we always contribute to, and that is electronic waste, shortly in the short form called e-waste. So they are generated from modern, this our lifestyle. There is a lifestyle waste. Many of the ways that we have now is some 50, 60 years ago, they were not problems. But now everybody, we have gadgets, we have electronics, every home has, some homes, every room has a television. Everybody, now that children are learning online, every child in every home now has either a phone and an electronic device for e-learning at home, especially now that we have the post-COVID era. So we are now having a quantum of a lot of gadgets, electronic gadgets. Like I said, when I started, many people now, once a new gadget comes out, they discard the old one and buy a new one. I remember then when I was in the UK, when I was doing my PhD, sometimes we just walk on the streets in the UK, in residential areas, you just see a TV, maybe all this is a flat screen TV dumped by the curb. Maybe the owner has bought a new television set, and we just put that one outside, and that becomes a waste. I remember the house I was living in then, we had problem with our washing machine. So the landlord was called, and we were all, is a student apartment, and we called him that he should come to fix the washing machine. So coming from Africa, I just felt, well, we will fix it and repair for us. By the time I came back from school the following day, I just saw the washing machine outside. He had brought in a new one, and I asked him, can't you fix this old one? He said there's no warranty anymore on it, and he has outlived his purpose, that he had it in the house for over 10 years, and it's discarded. And sometimes when you go along places in Lagos, like in Lawansin or Ijesha, you see on the roadside washing machines, microwave machines, a microwave oven, a lot of refrigerators, freezers, air conditioning units. Many of them are what these people have discarded in the developed countries. And Africa, Nigeria, for example, is a large recipient of electronic waste. You see tons and tons of electronic waste dumped in Nigeria. When you go there to buy them, some of them, they say they are tested, some are untested, some are just sold as scraps, and they may not be useful again when you plug them, but some repairers will buy them. Maybe they will remove the processor there or the motherboard of the laptop. Maybe you just motherboard alone. And that's why when you want to buy, you fix electronics, they call them, is it follow come? That the follow come are the ones that come with the old ones, and they will repeat them and use them to fix new ones. We have scraps of vehicles that they call them tokumbo, and some of them cannot work anymore. Maybe it's just the gear that is useful there, or the brake, or the radiator. They discard them and they use them to fix other ones. So e-waste is a very huge market in Nigeria. But it be as it may, it's also a form of problem in the environment, because many of the components of these discarded electronics contain a lot of contaminants. Example are your cathode ray tubes that we talk about, the CRCs are the cathode ray tubes that contain some components that are toxic. And also there's like contaminants like lead, cadmium, beryllium, mercury, arsenic. They are toxic, and you don't want them to enter into the food chain or the water cycle in the environment. Some of them also contain what we call flame retardants. These flame retardants, all electronics contain flame retardants. And a very good example of them is the brominated ones. We have what we call the PBDEs, polybrominated diphenyl ethers. We have the chlorinated ones, like the polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. All these flame retardants, many of them have been banned in developed countries because of their toxic and hazardous nature. So any old electronics, many of them contain these banned flame retardants. And why do electronics have flame retardants? Electronics, from your phone to your laptop, your TV, your microwave, air conditioning, one of the components are the flame retardants. The flame retardants are chemicals that are built or put on these electronics, such that if there is any inferno or fire incidents, the presence of the flame retardants will slow down the combustion of such devices. So flame retardants are actually good from the safety point of view. But over the times, researchers found that these flame retardants contain carcinogens, they contain endocrine disruptors. And so many of these flame retardants, the organophosphate flame retardants and halogenated flame retardants, were banned in the production of electronics. And as such, all those tokumbos and used electronics that are imported here, many of them contain these banned flame retardants. But the newer models that are being manufactured now, they've been replaced by what we call the safer ones have now been replaced. Okay, somebody just asked the question now that fishery waste not the same thing as agricultural waste? Well, in the context, they are also regarded, but under this definition, the agricultural waste arise from farming activities. Though some people still say that fish, they call fish farms, that fishes also are farms. But in terms of the pollution of the coastal environment, and the estuarine areas where you have water body pollution, fishery waste when you have fishes cultured close to the coastal areas or water bodies. It could also be termed as a waste, but like you said, fishery waste can also be classified as agricultural waste if they are still agricultural waste. So these are the classification according to their origin and type. So, and also waste can be classified. I don't know whether it's on this slide yet. According to times, you have some wastes that are peculiar to times and seasons of the year, especially when you talk about these agricultural waste. Sometimes you have more of when a season of a particular food item in the market, you have more of such waste. You have some other waste that you also, waste can also be classified according to the economic sector or the, how do I put it now? Income. For example, if you, the type of waste that will be generated in low income areas will be different from the waste you will see in high income areas. For example, if you go to maybe places like Makoko, you go to Ojuelegba, go to Mushin, go to My 12, Mojota, all those places where you have densely populated areas, you see the waste generated there will be much because the human population there is large. But go to Parkview Estate, go to Banana Island, go to some estates where you have the affluence, that the bigger the house, the fewer the number of people living there. The waste that will be generated there will be few because the house, you could have a very gigantic compound house and is occupied by very few number of people compared to places where you have all these one-room apartments, face me, I face you. Such places, you have a lot of waste that is generated. So the population also contributes to the type of waste that is being generated. I remember there was a time in my former house, we had a problem with our septic tank. So these people were invited to help us. It was the waste, the septic tank was not filled up, but there was a crack. There was a crack as a result of. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, apologies for that. There is a power outage here. So momentarily, I lost my connection. Can you make me, Aziz Adeni, please make me host again. I won't be able to share my screen if you are the host.
I don't know how that works, ma. If you could explain, I could really
So
go through
just
that.
click on participants and go to my name and make me host.
Okay, ma.
So you have to make me host. Because when the power went, I was using the university internet and I was logged out.
I've done that, ma.
Okay, thank you. So I can share my slide again.
Okay.
Okay. So can you hear me now? Can you see the slides?
We can hear you, ma'am.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So there's no, the power is gone here. There's no light here. So I was thrown out, but thank God there's a backup. So I was talking about the volume of waste that is generated is dependent on the pollution, the population size, as well as the level of affluence. The level of affluence would also affect the type of waste that is generated in any particular environment. So like I was saying that where we had our waste. Hello, please, can you mute yourselves, please? Please mute yourself so that if there's any background noise, you won't disturb the class. This lecture is being recorded. So the population size, like I said, and the level of affluence would also affect waste. I remember that the plastic waste that we're talking about now, it came up as a result of affluence years ago when people were having events and parties. You will see when we go for parties, we used to drink our refreshments, or either the drinks were from bottles, glass bottles, and those glass bottles will be recycled, whether it's Coca-Cola or even alcoholic drinks were usually drunk or sold in glass bottles, which are reusable. I remember being at the Coca-Cola factory, then they showed us how they will crush those bottles, mold them again, or wash them, sterilize them, and fill them back with Coca-Cola or any beverage. But nowadays, most times you go to parties, you see canned drinks and plastic drinks. People nowadays don't do parties. The people say, I can't go through the stress of collecting bottles at the end of the party. So because of our affluence and our lifestyle, we are generating more waste than necessary. But time is coming now that we have to go back to the use of recycling bottles. Now people will be in the bus after drinking Coke or water, they will just throw the plastic via the window. Even so, not even in pub, some are even driving. Was it last Sunday on a purpose that was on the expressway? A man just drove past, he was driving and he just threw from the window a plastic bottle after drinking the whatever the content it was. So nowadays, you don't see people, and that is why we are having a lot of this waste in the environment. But the reality is dawning gradually now that we need to go back to the old method. I once went for a conference in Belgium, and what we had there were just glass jars. It were just these glass jars and plastic, no, and glass cups. Every day when we're during the conference, when there is a timeout for coffee or tea, the water was being served with glass cups and glass jugs. And not, but before you see plastic cups, and people will drink, and sometimes some people can drink up to 10 times in a cup. As you are drinking, each time you pick a plastic cup, you drink and you dispose it off. So those are the things that could actually affect the waste we generate. So our lifestyle is also a function of the type of waste that we generate. So we said that sources of waste. Please mute your microphone. I don't want to mute everybody and people are still talking. So the waste, we've said this, that can be generated from homes or the public places. So, and the magnitude there, this is a scenario we also have for Nigeria, but looking at a less developed country, waste per capita waste generation is increasing. So per capita waste is the waste by each person generates. If I ask everyone, nowadays you go to work, you drink water or you drink a beverage, your canned or bottled drink, you take some other things that you may have to, maybe packaging of your biscuit or food or whatever. So some people buy food in takeaway packs every day. And after eating the food, they discard it. So per capita waste generation increases yearly as our lifestyle, like I said, increases. Urban population has more of increase in waste generation because of our lifestyle and our affluence. And also, you're talking about India as a case study, more than 42 million tons of municipal solid waste. You know, India has a population of over 1 billion, and can imagine generating over 42 million tons of waste, municipal waste. We're not talking of other type of waste. And each person generating about 200 to 600 grams of waste per day. And that is a lot, a huge thing. Even in Lagos here too, by the time you drink a bottle of water, a bottle of Coke or pet drink, you buy food in a takeaway pack, you and some other waste each day, you know the type of waste you generate. So if waste is not managed properly, we know, like I've mentioned in passing, talking about waste, it affects our health. We see that there are many of the toxicants, if they get into the water body or they get into the food chain, human being, if we look at the food chain, starting from the lowest organism in the food chain, man sits at the top of the food chain. So if the thing is migrating through the lower animals, maybe from your fish or your animals, or vegetable and plants or food, get into man, there's something we call bioaccumulation. This waste will not just enter the body and you excrete them immediately. Some of them are lipophilic. What we mean by lipophilic is that they are stored in the fatty tissues or the adipose tissues of the body, and they sit down there and they accumulate in such places. And by and large, over time, some years or months, or depending on how the effect is, the outcome could be some carcinogenic effects, like people coming down with all sorts of cancer. So our health is severely affected if waste are not properly managed. It affects our socioeconomic conditions when you see in the environment waste littering everywhere. Affects that. And when people get sick as a result of improper management of waste, some diseases are also the resultant effects of poorly managed waste. Talking about, let's say, liquid waste now, in places where their sewage is not properly monitored or disposed of, there are some waterborne diseases that are prevalent in such areas. People come down with typhoid, cholera, and some other diseases. And when people are predominantly falling ill, the economy of such places would also be severely hampered. It would affect our coastal and marine environments. It affects our climate. How do they affect? Does this affect our climate? In second semester, I'll be looking at climate change. But in a brief, when waste are not properly managed, there could be some release of gases, what we call greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases, they're like your carbon dioxide, are those gases that will affect the environment, leading to climate change. And when there's climate change, you have irregularity in the weather, or the pattern of the weather. Now, since yesterday or 2 days ago, we are battling with Hamatan in the heat, or in the middle of towards the end of February. So there is a change in our climate now. Hamatan that we had expected in December, January, coming in February. There was a time, I was in April, I was in the UK then, there was snow falling in April when it was supposed to be spring, that you are not expecting to have snow. Now in America, we are having severe weather pattern. They're having severe snowfall now, that some places in Texas have been having have had power outage, where all the water in their and the taps or their pipes became frozen. Many pipes burst as a result of the harsh weather conditions. So our climate is also being affected when we don't manage our waste well properly. So the greenhouse gases are daily accumulating in the environment. Places where you burn, when landfill sites are burnt, there'll be release of greenhouse gases, your CO2, your oxides of nitrogen. Chlorofluorocarbons also are greenhouse gases. And these chlorofluorocarbons are usually found in your refrigerants of fridges, freezers, and air conditioning units. They have been banned, but we still have some of these old equipments that contain chlorofluorocarbons. And these also are greenhouse gases that, as they accumulate in the Earth atmosphere, they cause the surface temperature of the atmosphere to increase. And this, as this increases, the ocean temperatures rise. There will be the melting of the icebergs. And as the icebergs melt, you have ocean surge. There was a time in Lagos, we have the level in the rise of the sea, and there was a flooding. All the coastal areas became flooded. So these are human activities that have led to the change in our climate. And apart from the environment that is affecting, is also affecting our crop yields. For example, when rain do not fall when it is expected, and farmers in haste, okay, this is planting season, they hastily go to plant their crops, expecting rain to fall. And weeks on ending, there is no rain. There will be lower crop yield, which will lead to hunger, will lead to poverty, and many other things that will come as a result of that. We are having deforestation now because there's less rainfall. There's the water supplies are not in abundance anymore. So waste problem is a severe problem that will not just affect individuals, will affect the environment, would also affect our climate. Human health is also being affected, and our ecosystem, loss of biodiversity. Like I said, when aquatic organisms are now eating plastics, many of them die, and they could go into extinction when these are not properly managed. Deserts are encroaching, and it's also causing a lot of conflict issues. All the Fulani headsmen, they are coming down south because there is no conducive pasture for their animals to graze on. So they are capitalizing on coming to forest reserves in the south to graze their animals. And this has also led to conflicts and a lot of crime-related issues. So when waste are not properly managed, we human beings and the environment will suffer for it. So talking about waste, there's a climate change now. Some countries are now becoming warmer than expected. 2016, summer 2016, when I was in the UK, there was a day that everywhere the temperature, I had to look at the weather of Lagos that particular day and the weather of Birmingham. Birmingham was warmer than Lagos. Everywhere was hot. And the way they built their, many of their homes, there is no fan, there is no air conditioning. That night, I remember I had to open all the windows because it was very, very hot. Places where they were not hot before are now becoming warmer. Nowadays, there was a time that I read in the news that in the UK, some people were having malaria because the mosquito that is the carrier of the malaria, the plasmodium, the environment is now getting conducive for them to thrive. People that are now having malaria and they never had contact with someone that had been to the malaria endemic areas. So a lot of things are happening. So that is why the importance of waste management should not be undermined. So they built up, we've talked about greenhouse gases, GHGs, they are built up as a result of waste. Carbon dioxide is a major gas that is released when wastes are not properly managed. Methane also is also a gas that is released during decomposition of biodegradable waste. We have nitrous oxide, and when CO2 is released into the atmosphere, they would also accumulate the levels of CO2 in the environment by burning of your fuel, burning of fossil fuels, wood, and other solid waste. Methane by the composition of organic waste in landfills, raising of livestock, methane is released, and the production of coal or natural gas. NO2 is also emitted, is a gas emitted during agricultural and industrial activities, as well as combustion of waste. So human exposures, we said human beings are exposed to this waste. How are they exposed? Ingestion is the one route of exposure when humans ingest contaminated water or food, whether it is plants, vegetable, or animals that are reared in environments that are contaminated, or animals that have grazed. If, for example, your cow grazes in a place where there is contaminants, the cow is eating grass that is contaminated, and you are eating the meat of the cow. And as you're eating the flesh or the meat of the cow, you're also ingesting some of the contaminants that the animal are taking. And over time, these contaminants build up in the body. There's a study we're doing currently on analysis of contaminants in human bodies, and we're looking at the breast milk samples of mothers. One of my PhD students is looking at breast milk samples. And why are we looking at breast milk? Some of these contaminants are, like I said, they are lipophilic. What we mean by lipophilic is that they love fat. They always stay in the fatty tissues of the organisms where they are found. And we know that the breast milk is majorly made of fat. And we have collected, it's been a very interesting study. Many mothers were not willing to donate their breast milk for the study, but we've collected well over 100 samples of breast milk now, and we're going to analyze them for some of these contaminants in the human body. So when human beings ingest them, there is no excretion mechanism. Sometimes the body naturally excretes them, but the rate of excretion is not as effective as the rate of absorption into the body. So that is why even some of these fishes that have these fatty fishes that do not have scale, that's why some people say they are not healthy to consume them, because the fatty tissues, we've done a study on fish samples as well. All these fatty fishes like your catfish that have a lot of fat in them, they tend to harbor a lot of contaminants in them. But fishes that have scale, sometimes when they're in the polluted environment, the scales sometimes act as sieves that sieve off those contaminants from them. Also, human can be exposed through disease vectors. So disease vectors can also release contaminants into human body. So vectors release contaminants into the human body. Then inhalation, when people inhale contaminants, inhalation could also be a route through which contaminants can get into the human body. Then dermal exposure, where the skin, the surface of the skin, and the largest organ in the human body is the skin. So that's the very big exposure route of these contaminants in the human body. So on the point of contact, we said the animals can, the plants can, the contaminants can absorb into soil, and they can be stored in the soil, and plants can take them off. And sometimes on the soil, there could be runoff when there is rainfall and there is a runoff of the rain. The runoff can also carry along with it, as the runoff of the rain, aftermath of the rain, can also carry some of these contaminants, or it leaches. Leaching is the means whereby contaminants percolate through the soil, layers of the soil, and go into the depth of the soil, such that sometimes when you dig a well for your groundwater, the groundwater is, though is far beneath the surface, there could be some contaminant that had over time leached through the profile of the soil and gone into the core of the matrix of the soil. So leaching could also bring that. Animals could also, some animals that prey on these contaminants at the sites where they are dumped could also have them in them. And when man eats such, there sometimes they eat, some people eat animals. Yes, Samuel, you have a question? Unmute yourself and ask a question. Unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay. Hello, ma. Please,
Yes.
I want to ask that how come we have ventilation here as point of contact through air, or what is that, ma?
Okay, yes, that ventilation there is actually, no, remember we said that one of the sources of exposure is inhalation. So let's say there is a particular study we did, looked at flame retardants in indoor micro environments. Some of these chemicals, some of them over time, they leach out of your materials. Let's say you are working, maybe an AC unit, for example, sometimes it gets hot. Some of these chemicals there can go out in terms of forms of tiny particulates or in the environment, and some of them settle on dust. And you know, dust are microparticles that you can inhale them. So if you're in a place, maybe in a micro environment, and you have some of those contaminants saturated in the environment, you can inhale them, and that gets into the human body. So like these people that we are looking at, their breast milk, they may not be eating things that could even be via any of this route of exposure. So ventilation is also one form of it, as point of contact. All right. So there are times also there is the direct dumping of this waste in rivers, in lakes, and in water bodies. And sometimes when it is raining, especially in these slum areas, and there is a flood, you see them, that is when they'll be bringing out their dustbin, dumping it in the rain, so that as the rain is flowing, we will carry it along. But the rain will not take it to a landfill site. The rain will definitely take it as a runoff into rivers and lakes. So now we also want to look at hierarchy of waste. The hierarchy of waste, we have what we call the 3 R's, but this includes more than the 3 R's. The 3 R's, we have reduce, reuse, recycle. But the waste hierarchy starts from prevention. Always that prevention is better than cure. So is there a way I can prevent the generation of waste in the first instance? That is waste prevention. If it is not preventable, it can be minimized. You can minimize the waste, and that is another favored option after prevention. Or it could be reused, recycled, be used for energy recovery. The least favored option is disposal. You want it such that when nothing else can be done, that is when your waste gets into the final waste stream where it is disposed. So starting with prevention, these are the steps taken that you don't want any waste to be, you don't want to generate any waste at all. Talking about when I said going for you're organizing a conference or a party and you don't want any PET bottle. So maybe you have made up your mind that, okay, the water will be served in glass jars instead of using plastic containers or paper containers, and so that you would reuse or use it again. So you are preventing the generation of the waste. Or you want to minimize the packaging. So you don't want, for example, what you're going to use for it, the packaging will not be such that by the time you take out what you want, the packaging is also another nuisance. They'll be thinking of, I recently bought a gas oven and a gas cooker with oven, and the packaging that came when it was delivered was something else. Every compartment there was wrapped and wrapped and wrapped with one styrofoam or bubble wrap and everything. By the time we dismantled everything and assembled the gas cooker, there was a heap of waste. So we need to minimize packaging, looking for materials. Though many of the materials that were used for packaging this particular gas cooker were not these big, bulky, styrofoams. They were very light and flat. It will still serve the same purpose, that it will prevent the breakage of any glass components, but it has been grossly minimized instead of putting all these thick white styrofoams to prevent that. So that is minimization. Then you also make sure that they are recyclable, and the materials also that is used for making them should also be reduced. I remember then, if you look at it now, the canned drinks that we are drinking now, the can is so light that you can even use your hand sometimes to even tear off those cans. But some years back, those cans used to be very thick and heavy. So when you minimize some things you use, that would also minimize the waste that you are using. Also, instead of using paper, some documents, you turn them electronic, to electronic documents. That would also reduce the waste. They make them recyclable, that they can be used for something else. Reusable, things like textile, leather, rubber can be reused. They should be compostable, that if they are organic in matter, they can be made into compost and they can be used. So when you do that, when you go through this process of reducing the packaging, reusing them, recycling, making compost, or whether municipal or home domestic compost, it will reduce the waste that will go into the landfill. And that's why I said in the waste hierarchy, you want this disposal to be the least option that you will take in waste recovery. So these are different types of waste that have been generated in a particular community. We have batteries, paper, cans, yard trimmings, cans of beers and aluminum, soda cans, tires, glass container, PET bottles, all these high density polyethylene bottles. So you can see them that and you can see these are more recycled. Auto batteries are usually recycled more, and newspaper trimmings can be recycled about 31%. Cans are also recycled. So many of these containers, tires also can be recycled, and this would reduce the quantity of these materials that will go into the waste stream. I recently bought a car battery, and where I bought it, I was told that if I trade my old battery, they will take, is it 5,000 off the price of the new one I bought. So like giving back and like having a cash back for your waste. So rather than keeping it or throwing it anywhere, I know that if I take my waste to the where it will be bought, there'll be value for it. So we have waste disposal. We've talked about plastics in the ocean. When you burn it in the river or lake or sea, it will get into the environment. So you can this is a category of waste disposal. You can either dilute and disperse, concentrate and contain the waste. So solid waste can be concentrated, and you isolate them in a particular place, like you have your pollution dump sites where the dumps are isolated there and they're kept. Then also some other options is that there's resource recovery, whereby you can generate electricity from that, can generate gas, like the methane gas that is released at landfill sites can be bottled. What we used to cook at home is methane gas. That can be converted into cooking. I've seen some students made a project whereby septic tank, the gas that is oozing out of the septic tank was used to power a generator. Then we could also do energy recovery, incineration, pyrolysis, gasification, or anaerobic digestion. So these are the options that we look at for the final waste, when after everything is done, no reuse, no recycle can be done, or no reuse can be done. You can now take these options as the final options of your waste product. So we looked at this before, there's no need to talk about it again. So chemical poisoning, impact of waste on health, chemical poisoning, There can be flooding when waste is not properly managed. And when there is rain, the stormwater runoff can result in flood when the drainages and the canals have been blocked with plastics and other sorts of biodegradable with low birth weight in human or mothers. There have been researches whereby mothers that have been exposed to contaminants give birth to babies. So the birth outcome is very low. We've thought about some of them are carcinogens. So many cancers have been traced. Congenital malformations, those are some chemicals are mutagenic. So, and this also affects some babies are born with some congenital malformations and neurological diseases. Some of them are endocrine disruptors, leading to some other forms of diseases in the body, vomiting, hospitalization, increase in of hospitalization. Then there was a time there is a place called Minamata Bay in Japan. A lot of people died because they were eating fish that had been contaminated with mercury. We've talked about this of animals, oceans, animals ingesting plastic. A lot of algal population. You see some rivers with algal bloom because of the pollution of it. There's a degradation in water and soil quality. The environment, as we have explained all this before. I have to leave you now because Professor Lanyika will be coming in by 12. So what should be done? We've studied about reuse, try to reuse things, recycle things. Instead of using disposable things, use cloth napkins that can wash. Instead of using diapers for babies, I know many mothers will not like this. Instead of using diapers, use napkins that you can wash. So your diapers would reduce the load that is going to the landfill site. There is packaging for, so when you receive some materials, you can use that packaging to package some other things. Then reuse materials rather than buying new ones, refurbish things that are old. Your old book, clothes, computers, and everything, you donate them. Like in the UK, we have some, we call them charity shops. People go there, or your clothing that they've used before, they take them. Many of those akube that people buy, some of them are old clothing that people have donated, and they bring them here and they are selling them. Old books, computers, materials, you donate them or give out to people. A lot of charity organizations collect used materials and give people. And then you should be trained, people should be trained on how to reduce waste, even in the office. Instead of doing paper mail, you can send out electronic mails instead of paper waste that will be trashed. There are sometimes when you receive some mails, they'll tell you that consider the environment before you print this mail. You can read it off your device rather than printing them. So there should be constant awareness of people telling them about the need to recycle and not to put waste in the environment. So even in local communities also, there'll be campaigns on how people can also, only that people in this part of the world don't obey. Like remember there was a time in the University of Lagos, there were in strategic places where there were some box-like containers where people should be putting cans and bottles. When you open it, you see all sorts of waste. People are not properly enlightened and educated on how to dispose of. So this is also a major problem that we are having. So the class will be ending here now. And I'll give you a little time to rest before so Professor Lanyika can have a class as it is.